So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Conversations for Equal Pay Live, a five-part live recording series to commemorate Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Each show features a leader at the center of gender and race equity. Conversations for Equal Pay Live is affiliated with the Black Women's Equal Pay Day Commemoration Project, which launches on August 13th, Black Women's Equal Pay Day. The recordings will be broadcasted for the podcast, Conversations for Equal Pay. The first recorded episode airs on August 13th, Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Tune in on Spotify or visit www.conversationsforequalpay.com. I'm your host, Julene Allen, CEO of Women of Color in the Workplace, and these are my co-hosts and co-leaders, Jamie Gathers, Chief Operating Officer, also founder of Women of Color in the Workplace Atlanta, Chief Communications Officer, Ashley Brazil. And we're sitting with the amazing Raena Sadler, Vice President of People and Managing Director at Lean In, at the Sheryl Sandberg and Dave Goldberg Foundation. And she's one of my sheroes. If any of you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A window, and we will pick a few of your questions towards the end.
All right, so welcome everybody. Thank you, Raena, for being with us this morning, and we're just gonna hop into the conversation. So the first question we have here is, you're on the senior leadership team at Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg's and Dave Goldberg's Foundation. Tell us more about your role and what that entails.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for hosting me this morning. I'm really excited about this conversation. So I've been with the foundation for about 6 years now. I actually started as our head of product. So when I joined, it was a small team of 6 or 7, and I was responsible for all things having to do with the website. And as we grew, now we're sitting at 35 people, which is probably where we'll stay for a little while. But we needed a lot of process and more intentionality behind building the culture. So Sheryl and Rachel were really gracious. Rachel's our CEO, and they let me take on people operations. My background is I'm mixed. My dad is Black, my mom is Filipino, so I'm first generation on my mom's side. And I've always been really interested in, building bridges and creating really diverse, inclusive, healthy environments, and have been lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that at Lean In. So we've built a really amazing team. A lot of people actually don't know this about our team, but our team is half people of color, and about a third of us are Black or Latina. And it's been a lot of fun, and we've had, a lot of learning over the years, building such a, diverse team and intentionally creating the culture that we want to have. I've made my way over the years into my current role, which is VP of People and Managing Director. On the people side, I'm responsible for culture, hiring, performance management, and on the Managing Director side, I'm responsible for our team operations, so ensuring that the team is functioning smoothly and doing what we're supposed to be doing in alignment with our strategy and goals.
Awesome. That's an amazing culture to be a part of.
It's been really fun.
Oh, you're muted, June.
It's not a Zoom call if someone doesn't say you're muted.
Let me try that again. Raena, we are so excited about the State of Black Women in Corporate America report, facilitated by Lean In, which launches on August 13th, Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Women of color in the workplace contributed a small amount to that study, and we're so honored. If you can share, what important information do you feel this report will reveal about Black women, and who will get this report?
Well, thank you so much to Women of Color in the Workplace for contributing to the report. It was great to have your qualitative data included in our research. In terms of what important information this will reveal about Black women, So it's called The State of Black Women in Corporate America, and it draws on 5 years of our research working with McKinsey and Company on the experiences that Black women are having at work. It's actually based on the largest data set of its kind on women of color, which we're really proud of. And it outlines concrete, actionable steps that companies can be taking to do better by Black women. Every year, our research tells a lot of the same story, which won't be news to anyone on this call, which is that as Black women, we're having a harder and worse experience in the workplace than almost everyone else. We're underrepresented in the C-suite. About 1% of C-suite leaders are Black women. In the Fortune 500, this is well known, there are 0. We're hired and promoted more slowly, and especially at the first step up to manager. So we really bring this to life in the report. For every 100 entry-level men who are promoted to manager, only 58 Black women are promoted, and it's 72 for all women. So, I mean, I know we're all used to hearing really depressing numbers all the time, but this number is actually pretty insane. So I want to slow down and walk through it. So at the first step up to manager, this means no one has done that job before. Like a large number of men are getting promoted to this position that everyone was qualified enough at the entry level to be hired. So that either means that men are, this much smarter and inherently more qualified to become a manager, or there's a lot of bias at play, which is obviously what we know is the case. Another finding is that we get less support from managers. Almost 60% of Black women have never, not once, had an informal interaction with a senior leader. And we often, as you all know, we're often the only person like us in the room. And that's a really isolating experience. I mean, how many of you all have been the only person like you in the room? We're often the only woman in the room. We're often the only Black woman in the room. We're often the only Black person in the room. And that's an experience that's filled with heightened pressure. So we bring a lot of this data to life. We are also tying in some of our research in partnership with SurveyMonkey, and have one surprising, but probably not so surprising to this group, finding on allyship, which is that 8 in 10 white employees see themselves as allies to colleagues of other races and ethnicities, but Black women actually don't see that. Less than half of Black women feel like they have strong allies in their workplace. And this is a huge discrepancy. So there's a big mismatch between what white employees think they're doing and what Black women feel like they're getting. Mm-hmm. In terms of who will receive this report, it's going to be available online for anyone to download and read. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, this will be live in a week. You can go to leanin.org/Black Women at Work. And from here, you'll be able to find a couple different things. One is this report. Another is our Black Women's Equal Pay Day information with all of the data around Black Women's Equal Pay Day, how that impacts Black women. And you'll also be able to find a link to a page developed by the Black women on our team and bringing a lot of our research to life. It's called Working at the Intersection: What Black Women Are Up Against. And we also hope that corporate leaders and managers will read this report. We hope employees are going to read it, and that the Black women who are reading it find it to be very validating, and that the non-Black employees read it and really learn a lot from it. And there's a very large section in the report that has a lot of solutions. And so hopefully everyone will also find it, very concrete and actionable. So it's not just a lot of information about what's going wrong. It's a lot of information about what everyone can be doing to fix it.
Thank you for doing this work, Raena.
Thank you for contributing.
Yes. It's a huge undertaking to, compile this information and also to work out solutions that are actionable, and just making this information available, I think, is a big part of the work, because I've been seeing recently on LinkedIn where workers of color are bringing up issues about their experience, just kind of telling their stories, and a lot of people who don't reflect them are saying, well, where's the data for this? Mm-hmm. Substantiate that experience. Where's the information? What book can I read about this? And it's like, it exists. Like, it's been existing for years. It's been updated, many times, but I think just exposing people to that information and giving people of color tools to say, when they are questioned, to say, here's actually the latest study, you can read it, just makes things a little bit easier. So,
I agree. I wish we lived in a world where just the lived experiences of Black women would be enough to help you drive that change, and you could just be heard by speaking up. But we all know this, we're not. And so we always joke about this on the team. We have those receipts. We have this report is those receipts. And I think in the same way that Lean In was powerful, it gave a lot of people language. Lean In, the book, it gave people language to say, so I'm not crazy. This is happening. There's data behind it. This is what's going on. We're hoping this is the same thing. I mean, we've had this data for 5 years. It's in our report, but I think a dedicated report just about this and layering in some of our research, I think it helps give language and validation to these experiences, because that's oftentimes, unfortunately, what companies need.
mm-hmm.
It sounds like an incredible tool specifically for human resource people in the C-suite of the chief human resource officer, or even just the director of human resources, or smaller companies, the HR manager, because a lot of times the challenges start there. And when they're brought to that office, they're not adequately addressed because they're not aware of biases, their own and others that exist within the organization. That sounds like a tool that they could really use, just to maybe open their eyes, because sometimes people, they can hear it, but they need to see something that backs it up, because they look at it as, well, maybe that's just your thoughts or your experiences. And it's like, no, this is a problem. This is a systemic problem. This isn't one person's experience or someone having a bad day. This is a problem across the board. Yeah.
And what I mean by that, it's about time powerful organizations like Lean In are investing in the experiences of Black women, because I mean, we already know our issues. There's a lot of organizations that are people of color led and comprised of mostly people of color, and they know their issues, right? But it's going to take big organizations like Lean In that are investing and really are exploring, like, why aren't Black women advancing, and actually putting money behind that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think one trap a lot of companies fall into is they have tended in the past, they have, women's efforts. They set targets and track, how are the women at the company doing? And then they also separately track, how are different, like, people of different races and ethnicities doing. And one of our big solutions is you need to be tracking, more intersectionally. You need to track at the intersection of gender and race. Like, we know that specifically Black women are having a much worse experience than women of color overall, who are having a much worse experience than women overall. Who are having a worse experience than the men overall at the company. So it's really important that you're designing solutions as an HR leader for the people who are most impacted and for the people who are having the worst experiences. Otherwise, you're usually designing for the most visible group, which does tend to be white women.
Mm-hmm. So overall, Black women have unique experiences, as we've been saying, socially, politically, and economically. What do you feel it takes to be a Black woman in leadership today?
I read this question and I thought, whew, really thick skin. I think everyone's journey is different. And overall, I've been really fortunate to have great advocates and be lucky to work in really, positive workplaces and have, overall really healthy teams. But that being said, there's a lot you swallow or in stomach, or at least I have. So based on that, I would say, I think there's a few different things that it takes to be a Black woman in leadership. One is resilience. It's not easy. Leadership, I think, already is hard enough as it is, but being a Black woman in leadership in a workplace that wasn't designed for you, that's a whole other ballgame. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's seeking leadership, you're going to meet a lot of resistance along the way. And we have to remember there's thousands of years of white supremacy and patriarchy and, deep-seated biases that are kind of in everyone's minds and embedded into our workplace culture. So you're going to hear some things, you're going to feel some things, you're going to experience some things, and you need resilience. And I think another thing is hustle. You know, I think growing up, you hear you've got to work twice as hard, you've got to be twice as good. And unfortunately, I mean, I've found that to be true. You know, I think it takes a lot of hustle and the ability to keep yourself aspiring and to just keep betting on yourself, even as you do face resistance.
But it's unfair.
It's very unfair. Very unfair. Which is why you need that resilience and that grit. I think two other things. One is actually patience. For me, I've really had to learn, you know, earlier in my career, kind of coming in guns blazing, like wanting to set the world on fire and create change really fast. You know, I had to learn how to lose a battle so that I could win the war. And I've had to learn that not getting the outcome I wanted meant I just needed to wait until the timing was better and draw on my resilience and try again. Again, when we're working with so many deep biases that are in all of us, you know, we're not going to get to an equal workplace overnight. And so I do think to be a Black woman in leadership, you do have to understand that and be able to kind of have patience in that, and also hope that it's worth continuing to try. And I think the flip side of that, the last thing I think it takes is actually impatience. We know this from our data that Black women, we're often the ones who are uplifting our communities. We're mobilizing our communities, our friends and families, getting them to vote. We're pushing for change. And I actually think it is our dissatisfaction and mobilization that propels our communities forward. And I think that, you know, Black women in leadership, we bring this to the workplace, and our workplace, or our research shows we are ambitious for ourselves and also for our communities. More than any other racial group, we cite as a reason and a motivation that we want to become top executives so that we can influence our workplace culture. And I think our impatience with the way things work now and our desire to make things better, that's often a really clearly and well-recognized aspect of our leadership.
Awesome.
So Raena, as you know, there's a pay gap for women, and we're talking about this every year, but the pay gap is wider for women of color. Unfortunately, the pay gap exists across almost every occupational sector. What can Black women do to close the pay gap?
That is a great question. Some context for those of you listening or watching, if you're not familiar with how the American days work, you know, Black Women's Equal Pay Day is next week, or if you're listening on the podcast, it's today, which marks how far into 2020 Black women have to work to catch up to what white men earned in 2019 alone. So, I mean, it's August. It's just so late into the year, and Black women make 38% less than white men. And we also make 21% less than white women. And so this pay gap, it's a huge injustice and a huge financial blow. You asked what Black women can do to close the pay gap. And I would first want to say, you know, it's not Black women's job to close the pay gap. We didn't create the problem. We're not responsible for the problem. It's happening to us, and it shouldn't be on us to fix it. That being said, it exists, it's happening to us, and we have to be loud, and we have to make sure we understand what we can do and what is within our own power. I think the great thing about this moment is the wind is at our backs in diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations. You know, there's a lot of employee activism going on. The national spotlight is on issues of inequity, particularly for Black people. So I think there's two things you can do. One is ask your company if they've done a pay audit. If this isn't something, and you all know your circumstances best, if this isn't something that it's safe for you to do, or you feel like there might be blowback if you're the one pushing for change, then, you know, find an ally and ask them to inquire. You can also share the Black Women's Report with your HR leaders or managers, and ask, you know, or even just your direct manager, say, hey, I saw this report. I'm curious, which of these solutions have we implemented, and kind of use that as a tool, kind of air cover to keep pushing. And then the second thing I think we can do is, you know your worth. There's a lot of really great sites out there. There's Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and they can help you understand what others in your field and around your level are being paid. Again, I think you've got to know your environment. If this isn't something that's safe to do, you could find an ally, find a peer, and have them help you, but try to understand what are those who you consider a peer making at your company. And then if you find out that you're being paid less, talk about it with your manager, ask for more. We have a lot of negotiation type tips on our site. But I do want to note, Black women are actually negotiating at the same rates as men. So we're really doing our part here, and it's on companies to fix this through pay audits and corrections.
Thank you for sharing those tips. Everyone got that? Go ahead.
It's so true about knowing your worth, because with my background is in HR, and I've seen so many people in the past come in and they just accept the first offer. But if you know what you're bringing to the table, you know that employment is a partnership, and you're bringing something to that company just like they're giving something to you with a job. Without, you both need each other. So it's absolutely true. You have to know your worth, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Our next question is, we're in a critical time. There's a lot of talk about racism. One of the topics that surfaced in the Women of Color in the Workplace discussion is that Black women are often left out of these conversations, since we are also affected and experience inequality differently. This is a common sentiment expressed among Black women. What are your thoughts about their grievances?
Yeah, can you say more about this? What was the discussion that came up recently?
So, you want to explain, Jamie?
No, you go ahead, Julie.
Okay. So, many of the women were expressing that, they really, their hearts were screaming about the death of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, but they kind of felt like Breonna Taylor wasn't getting the attention that, the same amount of attention. And they also felt that, we're experiencing inequality too, but we're kind of left out of these conversations. And so there was different, things we touched on, like police violence, sexualization of Black women, the fact that we are not getting ahead at work. So that was pretty much the grievance.
Got it. So it's about, Black women overall being left out of the workplace conversations. I mean, I think this is a really great point. I think it's really important. I mean, we do see this over and over again. And I actually think it's only recently that, years ago, I remember years ago, something like what's now, being nationally recognized as an issue would happen, and no one at work wouldn't acknowledge it. No one at work would say anything. I would sort of privately be, feeling a lot of grief and a lot of different struggles, and they weren't shared by anything else. Whereas, like a very prominent white or non-Black leader will pass away, and everyone talks about it. And I think that's a really hard experience that people don't understand. And actually, this is one of the solutions we may build into we may be building into the Black Women's Report, is that I think it's really important to include these conversations about what's happening and about race. And I think specifically make sure that Black women are being represented in their experiences, and those are being talked about. I think as companies, you want to be making a safe space for employees to be able to share and also understand. I think a lot of people even recently we had a really great conversation within our own team. I think a lot of employees just learned a lot about how much, actually a little bit before a lot of the police brutality, all in race-based violence was coming up in the news. We had, a longer conversation as a team about how that impacts the Black women and men on the team. And it was really eye-opening. I think people just honestly weren't aware. And then, as they became aware, they said, I wasn't aware, but I should have been. And I think these are important conversations for companies to be having. I think that for me, this is something I've struggled with a little bit is, you don't want to feel tokenized. You don't want to be, asked, when anything happens, or, you know, whenever there's kind of all things Black is what I call it, you know, you don't want people to bring you anything that's about, you know, Black people just because you're Black, and you don't want to feel like you're being tokenized. But at the same time, you don't want to feel excluded. I was saying to my own boss, I was just sharing my own personal journey, that I both want to hold it against people for not bringing it up, and I want to sometimes be frustrated that they did bring it up, because I wasn't thinking about it in that moment. And so I think it's a difficult thing, but overall, I think it's important to create safe spaces for these conversations, and make sure that Black people have the option to join in those conversations, and can help make sure people are being accountable and they're surfacing the right narratives.
I think we've all had to work on that balance, because you're right, there's part of you that wants to have the conversation, wants to be engaged in the conversation, wants to open the dialogue, but then at the same time, we don't want to be the representative for Black America, just because
just one person's opinion. Yeah,
right, you know, like, this is my position, this is how I feel, this is what I'm dealing with, and I can't educate you on all Black history and all Black experience. I think we've all been there.
yeah.
Well, our last question is, if you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
That's a good question. I think when I think about myself, not, you know, young school-aged me, but more young, early in my career me, I think I would say, you know, don't worry too much about what you want to be and what you want to do. I think you know, anytime I would find or sit down with a mentor, I would ask kind of like, how did you know what you wanted to do? Or, you know, what do you want to be doing in 10 years? And oftentimes I would see that mentor figure kind of smirk at me. And now I understand it better, because when I'm asked that by earlier folks in their career, I think I spent a lot of time trying to mold myself into something, you know, I wasn't, or thinking about this thing that I needed to be in 10 years. And I kind of think that's not really how it works. So the advice I would give myself is to figure out, what are you optimizing for? Are you trying to arrange your current work situation around lifestyle, around money, comfort, learning, team growth? What's the balance you're trying to strike, and what do you really value in this moment? And I think more importantly, figure out, what are you learning right now? What are the core skills you need and want, and make sure you're getting them. And then once you have, what's the next skill set, and the next. And I think that's a better approach throughout your career, to just make sure you're always learning and you're always getting out of your current work situation what's going to advance you in this moment. And then when you come out of that moment, you might have learned something different. You might have found out about a different path. You might have shifted what you're optimizing for. And so I think just kind of take everything in seasons is the advice I would give.
Great advice. Definitely.
Very pragmatic way of looking at it. I think a lot of us, especially as women of color, I think we come into our careers from our educational experiences already being used to like having to be perfect, and in order to just be seen as any type of valid. And so we don't let ourselves kind of be iterative and make mistakes, and kind of, we don't let ourselves grow, because we're trying to, perfectionism is so, like, as a way of survival, is such, you know, something that is just ingrained in us by the time we're like 6 years old. So I think that's a very unique way to look at like career development.
Yeah. I think I just always put so much pressure on myself but I didn't really know what I was going for. I remember actually when the Lean In book came out, I wasn't with the foundation at the time. And I had a conversation with one of the managers at our company, who was a white man. And I was talking to him about how, you know, I grew up with stories about my grandfather who sat in jail so that my grandmother could have an education. She, you know, he didn't want to send her to the Black school. And so he went to jail for trying to just kind of send her to the white school. And I grew up with stories like that and thought, okay, I've got to achieve, you know, I've got to achieve. I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Like, I've got to just keep going. And then you get to a point where, you know, I felt like I've come this far. I've gone through this education. I have to keep achieving and keep aspiring. And so I think I just kept putting so much pressure on myself. But I didn't really know what was the goal, what was I going for. And I wish I had focused more on, this moment, this season, and trusted that there's going to be a next season and a next moment. And what a better approach.
Mm-hmm. The worst pressure, I think, is always self-imposed, because we're always pushing ourselves to be the best, accomplish the most, get to that next level, so much that we sometimes miss the joy in the present time. So, yeah.
But I think it's a hard balance to strike. I remember talking to that manager, and he was like, "I don't feel any of those pressures. I don't know what you're talking about." And he was like, it was actually around the time I had my first daughter, and I was thinking, what if I dropped out of the workforce? Like, I would love to stay at home and be with the kids, but I can't, because I have communities that are depending on me to achieve and be able to open these doors and pull them up. And he was like, yeah, as a white man, my community is all set. We're good. I can do whatever I want. And I thought that would be very nice, but you've got to strike that balance, because I both think it's important to put, I have been in roles where I can lift up the community and get a lot of people hired and through the doors that wouldn't otherwise have those opportunities. And it's hard to both keep that pressure on you and know when it's okay to just not.
Mm-hmm. So true. Yeah.
Wow. Julie, if you're on mute, if you're trying to.
So are we ready to take a couple questions?
Sure.
We are.
Okay.
Let's see here. So I do see two in the Q&A box. This one is from Nico. She says, thank you for doing the lifting for this report. I believe it will be very useful in framing our way forward. Where can we find additional substantive data on the topic that we can leverage to structure the conversations with leaders of our organizations?
That's a good question. So I actually think this report will be really great because it's the deepest dive on solutions that are specifically targeted to, fixing the problems and making sure companies are hiring more Black women, promoting more Black women, retaining more Black women. So that would be the best place to go for that. But I think more broadly, it also builds on our work with McKinsey & Company. So if you go to womenintheworkplace.com, that's a more comprehensive report that looks not just at Black women, but all women. And there are sections within the report that specifically talk about, Black women, women of color, and different groups. But I think if you're bringing something to your HR leader, that would be a great place to start also. There's a lot of data in those. And then if you're looking for something today, right now, if you go to leanin.org, we have the working at the intersection page, which currently gathers a lot of our data on Black women and some solutions. And there's a few links in there as well.
And it's actually linked on the Women of Color in the Workplace website as well.
Great plan. Yes.
Yes, and that's Women of Color in the Workplace, all one word.com. All right, thank you, Nico, for that question. If anyone else has another question or something else comes up, please type in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will be more than happy to get to it. The second one also comes from Nico. As you can imagine, in these times of downsizing and scrutinizing financial spend, what are benchmark methods organizations are using to level set gaps in pay? I think she means like, what are some tried and true methods organizations can use to level these gaps in pay, even given the kind of the economic state that we're in right now?
Good question. I don't actually have a great answer for that. I think, because pay is handled so differently and we work with so many different types of companies, small, very, very large, we encourage companies to do a pay audit. but we don't talk about specifics on what should they do with that information. And the reason for that is because it varies so widely based on how your company does this. But I think the biggest thing is encourage your company to do a pay audit, and not just do a pay audit. A lot of times a pay audit means look at what the women are making, look at what the men are making, look at what white people are making, look at what Black people are making. And you want to make sure they're doing a pay audit and looking at that data intersectionally tracked by race and gender. But outside of that, I don't have a lot more information.
Great question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think we have to maybe do like an interdisciplinary like partnership with people who maybe know more about like economic policy or like payroll policy. But I wanted to ask a question, Raena, about I know you mentioned resilience in terms of like Black women in leadership, and as you were answering, a question that popped in my mind was, I think the other side of resilience, at least in my experience, is self-care. Can you tell me about like what your self-care looks like, how it supports your work? Yeah.
That's a really good question. I hope this will be a satisfactory answer. So I think self-care is really important. I think particularly as Black women. I mean, I think one thing is, I got this advice maybe 5 years ago from a colleague, and I thought it was really important. I think I was putting so much pressure on myself to, especially when you're in a leadership role and one of the only, people of color or people like you, anything like that, there's a lot of pressure to speak up every single time you hear something or experience something. And it's so fatiguing. There's actually not enough time in the day to walk people through it, correct everything. And so my colleague said, it's not like Pokemon, you've got to catch them all. Like sometimes you have to give yourself grace and, pick your battles, figure out which are the ones where you have power and it's going to be a good use of time and this is going to really impact someone else, which are the things that you're going to just let slide. And so I think one aspect of my self-care within the workplace is to not put pressure on myself to respond in every single moment, just because we know this as Black women in the workplace, there are thousands in the work week. Like there's so many more. It's not just like there was this one big microaggression this month. It's not like that. And so that's one aspect of it, is really think about which battles you're going to choose. And then outside of my personal life, I have I'm raising 3 girls, and it's a very full-time job. And so for me, it's been important to just let myself, people are often asking me, what are your hobbies? And I'm like, I work and I have 3 kids. I don't know what you mean by hobbies. Those are the things that I do. I do them well. And that's kind of it. And I watch a ton of television. I love television. And it's actually a really important part of my self-care is I just sit down at night and I unplug and I'll watch a show and kind of, I've been watching, it's often fiction. It's not like I'm watching documentaries during the day. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, deep problems and things in the world that are happening. And it's not healthy for me to sit at night and catch up on the news. And it's not healthy for me at night to watch really intense documentaries about other issues that I'm not super focused on. And so I've had to get to a place where self-care for me is being okay saying I love Netflix and every platform that's out there. It does a great service to me, and that's a big part of my self-care, and that's okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
That is more than okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes after just running a household, kids and work, the only thing you can do is just sit down and just stare at a television.
Do nothing. It's the best.
You just veg out with television or words with friends in my case. It's a problem, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love words with friends.
I don't want to move right now.
Exactly.
I don't want to work out. I don't want to bicycle. I don't want to read. I just want to sit here and watch some Netflix. I understand.
Yes. Thank you.
We have another question in the Q&A box. This is from Deborah Harris, and she is from Raena, UK. And she asks, The community pay is worse than their peers. How do you engage with a company that reports BAME pay, which subsumes Black pay, to split this out to start the difficult conversation?
For those who don't know what BAME pay is, it's the acronym stands for Black, Asian, Minority, and Ethnic.
Got it. So the question is how, if companies are reporting out Black, Asian, sorry, what was it again?
Yeah, so I'll just read it. The community pay is worse than their peers. How do you engage with a company that reports BAME pay, which subsumes Black pay, to split this out to start the difficult conversation?
That's a great question. Thank you, Debo, for asking it. I think actually we're going to be hitting this really, really clearly in our report, is that we can't be grouping things together. We have to have you have to have Black women broken out. We have to have Asian women broken out. And I actually think we will get to a point where it's very, I mean, we're already, especially, you know, in the Asian community, that grouping is very large and very problematic. There's a big difference, and there's a lot of differences within each group. And I think as companies get more nuanced in their understanding of intersectionality, we'll start to see more of those breakouts. Right now, we're just trying to get, you know, we're just trying to get anything broken out, because right now it's women over here and then other things over here. So we have a long way to go. But I think bringing the report to them, I think helping them understand that Black women specifically are having a unique and worse experience. We have our Working at the Intersection page, we have this report coming out, but I think they tease out really clearly how specifically this experience is different and worse. And I think, you know, financially it would be the same logic, right? I think you need to be looking at all metrics, not just pay gap and pay metrics. I think you need to be looking at all metrics by the intersection of gender and race. I actually think there's a lot of different ways that they should be breaking it out beyond that, but as we have a long way to go. And so I would bring that way of thinking to your HR company and have that conversation. And this is a conversation I've had with people too. You know, even just breaking out Black pay there's a lot of nuance behind what, you know, there's so many different Black women's experiences. And I think ideally we would be able to get more nuanced, but I think starting with getting companies to break that out and share it publicly, that would be a good place to start.
Awesome.
Great question, Debo. Thank you.
That's a really great question. It seems like before anything else can happen, accurate representation needs to be brought into these systems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'm sorry, were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
No?
I was just going to echo on the representation side. I think that's really important. I think companies need to set targets and set them publicly. And this is one of the solutions also in our report is, you know, say what your targets are, and tell those targets to all of your employees so that they can help hold you accountable.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is this. Anytime that you present someone with either inconvenient or uncomfortable facts, you're liable to get some pushback. What would you say would be the most appropriate response or the way to continue the conversation if someone presents the report to human resources or their manager or the business owner and they get shut down? What would you say would be, you know, a comeback for that?
That's a really good question. I think, you know, it depends on what that shutdown looks like. But I would say, I mean, if you're really unsure how is this going to be received at all, I think a fairly innocuous way to approach it is, I mean, we have a lot of solutions in the report. There's actually more than in our Women in the Workplace report, but in the Women in the Workplace report, we know that there were a number of solutions we suggested companies implemented. Only 6% of companies, there are several hundred who take the study, do all of those things. And so I think acknowledging that and saying, even in this report, it says only 6% of companies do all these things. I'm just curious, how many of these do we do? I think starting with information gathering is probably a pretty easy approach. I think, a lot of, all people don't react well to being put on the defensive side, or kind of being when you come out guns blazing. And so I think instead of saying we need to be doing this, these are things that, where are we with this? We're way behind. I think starting with, can you, here are some solutions. I'm just curious, which of these do we do? How do we track these? Do we have targets? Would management be open to setting targets and saying them publicly, or just, I'm just curious, sharing them with me. I'm just curious. I'd like to know. I think starting with just information gathering would be good. And so I think I think it's hard. Usually the role of HR is to just answer your question. So I think if you make the question, what do we do here, or what do we have? What can you share? That should go a little more smoothly.
It's true. Starting from a place of curiosity is always the best approach in any situation, I think. Yeah.
That's very true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I've had to learn over time. I don't think I always really had that approach, and probably would have been more effective if I did earlier on.
I just want to ask Raena. Raena, do you want to take one more question, or
Sure.
Do we have any? Okay. I think we have time for just one more question.
Okay. We do have one more in the Q&A box, and it's from Debo again at Lean UK. They say, regarding targets, can you share more about setting meaningful targets that are impactful?
Sure, that's a great question. I think I like the idea. Say the question one more time. I'm reading it, but I want to make sure.
Regarding targets, can you share more about setting meaningful targets that are impactful?
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't have a great answer offhand. I think it depends on what the targets should be. And I think it depends on, where your company is and what's going to be realistic. And so I think this is where both that patience and that impatience I talked about earlier come into play. Is I think, I love the idea. Debo actually has a second question here around co-creating. Where can management co-create some of these targets with Black staff? I think it's really important. We know this from the data, there's only 1% representation of Black women in the C-suite. And so, most of these decisions are being made without Black women's input, which is likely not going to get you as close to the target. I think HR companies or HR and company leaders finding ways to involve Black women, women of color, kind of who do they have on their teams that can be co-creating with them is really important. And I think it's for the actual target, it depends on where are you, what's a realistic goal, how can we actually stretch that goal a little higher. A lot of companies are starting at a place where they need to hire Black women. They actually don't have any in their company, or their numbers are so small they have nothing close to accurate representation. And so for those companies, it's setting targets around putting recruiting dollars around sourcing. The candidates are out there. I don't love the idea that it's a pipeline issue. People are out there. There are qualified Black women who have been overlooked for years and years. And so putting recruiting dollars behind that and setting a target around that. So I think it just depends on where are you right now. There's always a lot of progress to go. I mean, I shared some of our numbers with our team. We have about a third of the team are Black and Latina, and that's amazing, but there's always progress to go. And so figure out where you are, work with the Black women on your team, and then figure out what does it look like to go somewhere next, and to stretch that goal a little further, because usually what a company is going to be comfortable with, it's you can push a little harder.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Wrap up. Do we want to take a photo real quick before you close, Ashley?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We are so excited about further conversations within the Black Women's Equal Pay Day Commemoration Project 2020. Woo-hoo. Thank you again, Raena, for your time and your candid answers. We really enjoyed our time with you. And we look forward to you all attending again. Thank you so much.
Before we close, thank you to all our program sponsors and partners. Lean In, Ingredient, National Organization for Women, United States of Women, Miss Foundation for Women, Shriver Center on Poverty and Law, The Latinista, Speak Truth, The Enriched Mind, and Jamie Synergetic Virtual HR Coaching. Did I get that right?
It's consulting, but we were close. We were there.
Okay, sorry about that. Very sorry. The next date for the live recording is August 20th with Teresa Younger, President and CEO of Miss Foundation for Women. Our guests will be announced. Oh, I already announced it. We will send out a calendar request if you're interested in attending. Otherwise, check back at events.womenofcolorintheworkplace.com.